So we have an R&D lab where we have employees that have raised their hands and wanted to be part of that R&D lab that make the product better, frankly. And so we empower our employees to bring those ideas to us. And they work amongst each other. And I think that is the key in both of our locations to the success that Bohr has had.
Welcome to Get Unstuck On Target, the weekly podcast that offers senior leaders insights and strategies to not only lead with confidence and vision, but also to achieve groundbreaking results. I'm your host, Mike O'Neill. I coach top-level executives on the power of ethical leadership to forge teams to be as united as they are effective. In each episode, join me for insightful conversations with leaders just like you, providing practical advice to help you get unstuck and propel you and your company forward. Let's get started. Joining me is Dan Marks. He is the CEO of Bohr Electronics, a global provider of locomotive and transit electromechanical components. With a hands-on start in his father's repair shop and a climb through the transit sector to CEO, Dan's leadership and strategic vision has been pivotal in expanding Bohr's reach, crafting key partnerships, and broadening their offerings to stay ahead of the curve. And it's that progression, particularly career progression and professional progression, that I've asked Dan to join us today to talk about. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dan, I just introduced you as starting in your father's repair shop. Let's just start there. Tell me about what was the type of repair shop that he had?
So my father was in the electric motor repair business, and there are traction motors, which are electric motors that go on diesel locomotives. So his shop repaired those types of motors for industrial railroads, closed loop systems that you would find in a steel mill. As well as some of the Class 1 railroads that you see every day, whether it's Norfolk Southern or CSX.
I got you. So this has been in your blood from the very, very beginning.
It has been. In fact, my grandfather, my father's father, was a locomotive engineer, and my younger brother is a railroad attorney.
Wow. So Thanksgiving dinner, if everybody's at the house, we know what one of the topics is going to be.
For sure, every time.
Yeah, Dan, you have a very interesting background. And I think what I'd love to do as a starting point is invite you to kind of share a little bit about this progression. One might not necessarily set out to be the CEO, but you have sat in a number of seats that led to this role. Can you kind of walk us through that progression?
Well, sure. And some colleagues are surprised to find me sitting in a high-level operational role. I've always been in the sales role, even starting out of college in a non-railroad related role, working on a sales counter, very blue collar, renting construction equipment, through going to work for my father's business. It's interesting, when he started the business, I was excited that he was starting this venture, and told him that I'd like to come work for him, even if it just means sweep the floors. So I finally convinced him, much to his chagrin, frankly, for me to come join the company. And it literally was a bottom-up situation, just learning how to buy components, carbon brushes, bearings for traction motors, and what have you. And that really sunk in that we were making something to move the economy forward, and true manufacturing, or remanufacturing as it was. That really just hit home for me. And I think that's part of how America was built. And so it's somewhat of a privilege to be part of that growth, even from a small, dark traction motor repair facility in the hills of Western Pennsylvania.
You mentioned a moment ago that you kind of spent a lot of your time in sales, and colleagues kind of go, well, wait a second, I thought Dan was a sales leader, and here he is, a CEO. Let's talk about that a little bit. In what ways has coming up through initially sales prepared you best to be a CEO?
Well, it started in the sales selling and understanding the operations behind your internal customers, if you will. So as I rose through the ranks and became a vice president of sales for a major wheel manufacturer, I had to liaise with operations heavily. And then I became responsible for budgeting. And these are the items in which are necessary for a CEO to understand P&L, income statements. But on top of that, I got to build a sales team from scratch. And that leadership and that growth through understanding what it's needed to be a sales rep, being in a leadership role, I think the culmination of understanding leadership roles and the operational understanding, P&Ls, income statements, and then being able to build a rapport with senior level management, culminated in where I am today.
The nature of your industry is one most of our listeners may not be familiar with. Let's start with a little bit more about Boers Electronic. Can you put in layman's terms the kinds of things that you and your company produce?
So we remanufacture and manufacture electrical components that help make a locomotive move. A locomotive is a big generator. And just like your home has circuit breakers, so does a locomotive. It's powered by a diesel engine with a genset. And behind the genset is all the high-speed circuit breakers and the high-voltage circuit breakers that help propel the locomotive in forward gear or reverse gear. There's a lot of other components that we manufacture that you'll find on the dashboard, if you will, of a locomotive. And those components can last for 60, 70 years, and they can continually be rebuilt. So Boer has built its foundation on the repair and return of these electrical components.
That's very helpful. I favor a particular brand of shoe, particularly when I was wearing dress shoes. I don't wear dress shoes nearly as much as I once did, and I'll go ahead and make the plug. The company is called Allen Edmonds, and they're expensive. I would never buy them unless they were on sale, and I would oftentimes buy their factory seconds. A factory second for them there was a slight blemish. But what I loved about this company is that you can recraft these shoes. If you have a favorite pair of shoes, you can send them back, and in recrafting, it comes back. They look practically new, but they feel like your old favorite shoes. And that's part of their whole business model. Buy it once, recraft it perhaps once or twice. And I'm embarrassed to admit, I have shoes that I've had now for 20 plus years. Now, I don't want to liken shoes to components, but you said that some of the components are built to last for decades.
Absolutely. A locomotive has two life cycles. The first life cycle it has is when it comes right off the manufacturing line, built here in the United States primarily, the freight locomotives are, and that life cycle can be 25 to 35 years before it gets a rebuild. And it's just like a resto mod. If you have hot rod friends out there in the market that strip it down to the frame and rebuild it with modern technology. So instead of circuit boards from the 80s and early 90s, it's now microprocessors that get replaced in there. So our job as a rebuild and remanufacturer is to take those components and apply them back into the electrical cabinet, sometimes being supplied directly from the railroad, or things that we remanufacture ourselves and put in there, into the cabinet.
I appreciate you kind of clarifying a little bit more about what y'all make and why that's important. Let's go back, if you don't mind, to this progression that you went through. You started in your father's shop. You learned the industry. You shared a little bit about why your sales background has lent itself for you to move into a CEO role. What have you found as CEO as the biggest surprise?
I think it's people. I constantly say that the hardest thing about running a business is managing people. Mm-hmm. We have 60 employees, and while it's not a IBM or GE, and there's thousands of employees, it's challenging regardless of size to make sure that you're hitting the needs of the employees in such a way that they'll want to stay and grow with you. So it's important to understand, not in a bespoke way, but in a general way, enterprise way, what makes our employees, especially rank and file, what makes them tick? What do they need? What makes them want to stay and continue their career and grow with a company like Bohr Electronics?
Yeah, I know one thing that you pride yourself, because we've had an opportunity to have a conversation prior to scheduling this recording, is the culture of trying to foster innovation and collaboration as part of giving people that sense. Tell us a little bit more. In what ways have you tried within your company to foster that?
We give our employees an opportunity to bring their ideas to us. There is no there's no time to tell an employee that their idea isn't any good. So we have an R&D lab where we have employees that have raised their hands and wanted to be part of that R&D lab that make the product better, frankly. And so we empower our employees to bring those ideas to us, and they work amongst each other very well. And I think that is the key in both of our locations to the success that Bohr has had. The culture here is phenomenal. The creativity and the innovation and the ideas that come out of some employees, that if they're here for 3 years, 3 months, or 30 years, they bring great ideas, and we certainly let those ideas grow and mature, and we assist them on those ideas. And sometimes it's somebody needs to be sequestered in our R&D lab for days on end to figure something out, and we allow that to happen.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago that the culture here is phenomenal. In my line of work, I don't hear that very often from a CEO. They're asking us to come in and help build that. What is it about the culture there? Did you step into this role and the culture was already established, or have you found ways to improve what was already, I suspect, a good culture?
I stepped into a good culture here in Chattanooga, and in Searcy for that matter. Our Chattanooga staff the core has been with us for several years, and it's a fairly young staff. Our average age is 36 years old. So we have a very young group of people who not only work together, but also play together. And I think that little brother, little sister, big brother, big sister mentality works and weaves its way through our organization. We have done some things to assist. For instance, the team on lunch break throws kettlebells, and so they have this workout. So we recognize that this is something that's important to them, and we carved out some internal space and built a little gym with mats and an area where they can go, rain or shine, and work out. And understanding and listening to the team is just paramount. We run a survey every year, and we take the key areas from the survey and make it a yearly initiative. And we hit those initiatives, and we're communicating those initiatives. So I think when you put all that together, you end up with a very positive culture. Now, it's not perfect. It's typical. 10% of the workforce can be problematic, of course, but we try to work with everybody and understand where the pinch points and the pain points within the employees and the way that they need to operate day to day.
From your perspective as CEO, we have other key leaders listening and watching this episode. When you huddle with your counterparts, what are the kinds of things that you find yourself talking about?
Most recently, and it seems to come up often, it's usually on pay true up, making sure that we're paying and our pay ranges are appropriate, and rewards. We're rewarding employees for good work and making sure that we have a mechanism that's very easy for supervisors and managers and the executive staff to give an attaboy in the 1-minute manager style, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just a switch of a button and a $10 Starbucks gift cards end up in their as a text message on their phone. Things of that nature, I think, are very, very important. And also finding what's important for each business. We have a fairly liberal vacation schedule, so that employees, if they need to go to the dentist, they can go to the dentist. And if they want to make up time, they can make up time. And we make sure that we're available for the employees to come in and make up that time. So I think the human element is very important, and just understanding that everybody has a life outside of work and they need time. And we want to make sure that we give that time to them and that they don't feel like they're going to be punished by it.
You mentioned just an example of a kind of a spot award with the Starbucks cards, but you started with saying pay true up, and that is looking at actual, what are the numbers, and if there's some issues to address that. There's a bit of a science to that part. The numbers kind of can speak for itself. Let's speak about the art of truing up pay and the art of identifying things that are meaningful in the form of rewards. What have you found that's important to your employee base?
So there's a few things. When we talk about hourly rates in the true up, we speak of that because as this business was privately held for decades and then purchased through our parent company, Alderman Enterprises, we found that there was pay inaccuracy or some special pay for some people that perhaps the owners just felt that they were worthy of more. So we put a study together with some outside assistance to understand what the market would bear. And coming out of COVID, the market changed quite a bit with inflation. So we really did need to first do a proper understanding of pay. And that started with literally making sure we had job descriptions. So job descriptions were the most important parts. And then once we had job descriptions, making sure that they got into our Paylocity system, which we use for payroll. And then once we did that, and quite frankly, that took 6 months. And then once we did that, we could then go and do a pay band study. And then once we did the pay band study, then we could start to dial in and understand. That was a bit of the art and the science part. Where do we fall? And then it was, what are the benefits equal to what the pay is? Mm-hmm. So we have a very robust benefits program here. And that's where we find the employees are more interested. Now, everybody wants their top line gross pay to be as much as possible. So it was important for us to make sure that we were paying within the market, but also let employees understand how much it costs to be an employee and what the benefits were. And once we submitted that to each employee, and this happened in December, they started to understand that, wow, I'm much more valuable than just my hourly rate. When you talk about health benefits and the IRA that we put together through our Voya account, and then all the other stuff that we do that the company pays for short-term disability, long-term disability, you find employees start to appreciate that as they understand it. Older employees appreciate it more than some of the younger employees that we have, of course. And then I think also the really important item for employees is their PTO and making sure that we have enough PTO. So we increased our PTO from 2 weeks after a year to 4 weeks as soon as you get hired.
Goodness.
Which that's what the market, what we're seeing in the marketplace, and that's what we decided to do. And frankly, it's working quite well.
We've talked a bit about progression. We probably spent most of our time with production employees, but you've got leadership that you have to do this with, and you talk about your executive team. Speak to that. And in what ways has what we've been talking about affected your thinking and the practice of your key leadership team?
It's really interesting. I think my leadership team has softened me on the um, on the way that I operate with our employees. I came from a large organization that was somewhat harsh, and I brought that with me, and now we are very much more kid gloves, if you will, and it is because of the leadership team and understanding the culture here that they've brought significantly. We have some very talented individuals here, and I'm proud to say that we brought on a sales director that we poached from the outside, and has been a phenomenal coach and leader to our sales team. We have a fairly young controller that brings that dynamic, go get 'em attitude to our team, and he's not just a controller. He is. You can see the leadership just oozing out of the a young guy like him. And then our VP of operations has been around for a long, long time, and he brings that tribal knowledge that's necessary, and that softening that was necessary, I think, when I first started, in particular, on how we treat our employees and the importance of retention.
That's all we read when we read articles: retention, 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 in large part because people just don't seem to have the degree of loyalty to organizations. We know there's a cost associated with retention. To go from a 2-week after a year to 4 weeks upon hire, that's a pretty bold move. Did you find yourself swallowing hard before you okayed that?
Certainly have. We know how much it costs per day in production. So adding that time can be costly to the organization. But on the flip side, while it was a hard decision to agree on, it was the right decision, because frankly, we get more production out of our team, and the willingness to take a few hours to go to the dentist and then come back to work, or to pick up their time, is there because they see that we're willing to give, and they're willing to give back. And I think that has been very helpful for us in keeping our key players.
Dan, in keeping with the theme of this podcast, let me invite you to kind of reflect on a time where perhaps you, or maybe a client or your organization, got stuck. And when that happened, what did it take to get unstuck?
It's all about clarity. It's really interesting. There was a situation that happened several years ago with the Transit Authority, and they were very frustrated with the OEM. I do battle with the OEMs on a regular basis, being in the fields that I've been in the aftermarket business. But the frustration was that they were buying so many components, and it was just costing the Transit Authority just hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s a year. And I was doing my normal sales run in particular in Maryland with this particular Transit Authority, and we made a discovery that I could have put in my back pocket and made a lot of money. But we ended up being able to sit with them, with the Transit Authority. This particular part we found had a different part number on it all across the train, yet it was the exact same part. So we relabeled and were able to reduce their spend by 6 figures. Now, I could have kept this and put it in my back pocket and just sold, but when you build a rapport with an agency, you want to show them that there's give back. And this was truly a stuck situation because it was hurting their budget. And we found a way to make a quick adjustment, and they saved a bunch of money. And in turn, what that happened for me was it became a positive, because I was their go-to for components. And so for years, they would just pick up the phone. And even still today, I get phone calls from the same people who are now in consulting roles or have climbed the ladder in the agency, asking for advice or just consultancy, which they are now my business peers, and they're not customers any longer. So, it's interesting when you can find a product and get somebody unstuck.
It's a great example. Dan, as you talk, I'm listening to you, and I can see how and why you have done well in this role. And that is, there's an awareness and humility to acknowledging maybe I do need to kind of take the hardness off a bit. When you are talking to folks who are saying, "Gosh, I want to do what you do. I want to be the CEO," what guidance do you have for them?
Wow. Well, clearly, you got to find a business that you have fun in, and you don't use the word passion lightly, right? I mean, it's everybody has to work, right? But if you can find something that you really enjoy, and just figure out a way to find the mentors or a group or a company that you enjoy being with, and you can work that way through. I've actually been lucky enough to never look for a job. I've always been recruited for positions. So you need to do a lot of networking and spend a lot of time in an uncomfortable position, perhaps, where you have to glad hand with customers and vendors and just make friends in the industry. And I think that's very important to have business friends and associates that you can call and ask questions to and be comfortable. And that might take you out of your comfort zone.
In today's competitive environment, are you seeing more reluctance to do that, to reach across to suppliers, maybe even competitors? Or do you see that harder to come by, or do you see more of that nowadays?
Well, I have seen less, I think, after COVID, and people just don't travel nearly as much. And while trade shows and general meetings are coming back, people just aren't traveling to customers as much. There's not a need with Teams and Zoom. It's just easier to have a call. But networking is still important, and you have to find ways to network. And if you're willing and you have the drive, you can get here. I wasn't an A student, and I don't come from a wealthy family, and you need to work really hard to get what you need. But if you find your passion, you'll get there.
It's clear your passion does come through kind of loud and clear. Dan, we've talked about a number of things. What do you want our viewers and listeners to have as takeaways?
Don't be too proud of where you sit. I think is very, very important. Don't sit back on your laurels.
So tell me a little bit more about that. Why would you think of that as one of your major takeaways?
Well, because it's a privilege to be where I'm sitting. I was recruited for this role, and it's a role that some people don't last too long in. Right? You have to perform on several levels, and you need to be grounded. You need to work really hard and make sure that the team understands that you're with them and you're not just the captain. Right? You need to be a true leader, and that means coming in on Saturday, emptying the trash can, sweeping the floors, picking up a piece of broken pallet. Like, those things are very, very important, and they're key. And that's why I think it's important not to be too proud.
I love it. Dan, before we kind of wrap up with our final thoughts, I've got a question for our listeners. And that is, are people following you because they have to or because they want to? Are they obligated or inspired? One of my roles is a leadership coach. And as a coach, I work with executives who have a successful track record, but are now feeling stuck in their careers or how to move their company forward. They're frustrated because they're finding that with each level of success, the bar gets set even higher. But what worked in the past, it's no longer working. I work with these leaders to uncover hidden blind spots, challenge limiting beliefs, and foster a strong sense of accountability. So if feeling stuck sounds like you or someone you know, let's talk. Head over to bench-builders.com to schedule a call. Dan, I really appreciate what you have shared with us. You have opened my eyes to a number of things I hadn't really thought of. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. If folks listening want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can certainly go to our website at board.com or reach out to me via email at dmarks@board.com.
Do me a favor, spell board.com.
BOHR.com.
It's an excellent website, so I encourage you to check that out. And particularly, if you've heard something from Dan that you would like to learn more, I have found Dan very approachable. So again, thank you for lending your experience to the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I want to thank our listeners again for joining us, and I hope you have picked up on some quick wins from Dan that will help you get unstuck and on target. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Get Unstuck and On Target. I hope you've gained insights to help you lead with confidence and drive your organization forward. Remember, at Bench Builders, we're committed to your success, your leadership excellence, and your strategic growth. If you've enjoyed our conversation today, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. This show really grows when listeners like you share it with others. Who do you know who needs to hear what we talked about today? Until next time, I encourage you to stay focused on the target and continue to break new ground on your leadership path.